Hi guys, it's SkintBoot here, and today what I'm going to be bringing you guys is episode 2 of Community Feedback Friday. Now, since the first episode, I have had a load of really good suggestions commented on that video, but today, even though pretty much every comment was amazing, I have to pick only 5. So thank you to everyone that did comment, and even if you didn't get featured on this episode, then don't worry, because next week will always come around. So as always, to get your comment featured in an episode of Community Feedback Friday, simply drop your ideas on either this video or episode 1, talking about what can be added or changed in No Man's Sky to get the chance of being featured in an episode. So that's all I need to say for the intro. Let's get stuck into Community Feedback Friday episode 2. Okay, so the first comment which I picked out in this video isn't even particularly a completely unique idea to some extent. That sounds like really salty and horrible, but I didn't mean it to sound like that, and yeah, you get the idea. Pretty much what this comment says is quite similar to a lot of other comments, but instead takes one part of that and kind of makes it his or hers own. And this comment is from a person called Pancake, but spelt differently for some reason, and they said the following: some things I'd like to see added are abandoned space stations and or freighters filled with enemies and loot. Possibly the ability to take over an abandoned freighter after clearing it of enemies as an alternative to buying one. Not only would this add actual use for weapon upgrades, but it shouldn't be all that hard to implement, as I already have the structure models built. So pretty much, if I can take one thing from this comment which I think is the best idea, is the idea of combat. Obviously, combat isn't something which is emphasized in No Man's Sky. It does exist, but it exists kind of poorly, you could say, in terms of the shitty space battles and sentinel combat. The game isn't about combat, obviously. It's not about killing, it's not about war. It's sort of about exploration and discovering yourself as a traveler. It's really fucking philosophical when you get into it. But pretty much what I'm trying to say here is that this comment actually suggests that instead of combat just being this thing which is on the side, it actually has a reason, and this reason comes as an event of exploring, but putting these weapon upgrades to good use. Because the idea of exploring abandoned space stations and freighters are a good idea on their own. In fact, this is something which is requested quite a lot from the community. But by taking another element of the game, i.e. combat, and kind of molding the two together, I think they work really well in conjunctions. So yeah, definitely very good idea. Thank you, Mr. Pancake Man, for the comment. A big thank you for taking the time to comment. As always, thank you very much. Okay, so the next comment is from an individual called Brandon No, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. But this individual says a load of things. You can see here there's quite a lot. Not as much as that Reddit post, but most certainly still a lot. But one particular paragraph which I liked out of all of them, of course they were all fantastic, but I'm not going to be talking about all of them, was the first point which this individual made. And he says, or she says, the following. I'm not assuming anyone's gender here. More interesting underground exploration. That would include deeper caverns with things to actually discover underground, such as ruins, fossils, artifacts from the 3 races, etc. And the further you go down, the hotter it should get, so you would have to install the appropriate tech in your exosuit. Now, I think the idea of always digging a fat hole is almost like a sort of shared interest, especially in childhood. I think the idea of digging a big ass hole to try and get to Australia is something which, you know, everyone was sort of captivated by, most definitely. And in terms of No Man's Sky, I think it does make sense, especially as Brandon says, to do with the whole idea of artifacts and the fossils. It kind of further extends the history of a planet. It does just make it feel less like a load of polygons and more like something which actually has a history. It has a existing past which shaped it, and of course this could all be done with procedural generation, and I just think it'd be really interesting, especially the idea of getting tech upgrades to go further down because it will get hot, means that you can actually use lava in the game, and you can also pretty much just give the player that extra bit of exploration which would be needed. Of course, you could even go as far as to say that some planets would require more upgraded lasers to mine down, because say the material is stronger or it's harder or something like that, and others you can just puncture easily. You know, it just adds a bit more depth. So thank you for the comments. Obviously, I can't read all of it because that'd take way too long, but thank you, Brandon. All of them are really, really good. Thank you very much for taking the time to comment. Now, kind of similar to the last point to do with exosuit upgrades relating to environment changes, Lord of the Apes 79, which is a great name, says something which I think is really, really interesting, and that is the following. Rogue planets would be really cool. They would be totally dark because they have no star, and maybe even add an infrared upgrade on your suit to be able to see on these planets. So essentially, this is a fairly basic idea, but it seems like, at least to me, something which just should have been in the game from the very, very beginning. It almost seems like everyone comments something very, very similar to this, and I think that the idea of a rogue planet is really interesting. I've even had other comments of people talking about planets that have been involved with, say, like black holes and have become warped and distorted and things like that, and I think the idea of having almost like evil planets as such, planets which have a bit of a darker side to them, pun intended, and have a bit more challenge to them as opposed to just radioactive planets or any other kind of things which you got on the go. So especially with the idea, as the previous comment said, to do with upgrades for your suit, I think it will just add that bit more of a challenge, especially since if they could make it so planets from space are actually what they're like on the planets themselves. If you were to see a completely dark planet in like a dark section of space, that'd be really fucking cool. Would 100% change up the gameplay. So thank you very much, Lord of the Apes 79, for that comment. Really does mean a lot. Alright, so now we have a comment from an individual called The Game Relief, and this person says the following. An idea I'd have is that on each planet are a ton of Sentinel factories, where if you go in, you can hack this computer and get a few waves of Sentinels you have to fend off. And if you successfully fend them off, the Sentinel presence in that general area would be lower. And if you fend all in a general area off, then there would be no Sentinels whatsoever in that area. It would help with the resource gathering on hostile planets and for your home planet if there is a large Sentinel presence. Now this is something which almost took me by surprise, because most of the time people mention stuff to do with abandoned buildings and killing Sentinels and stuff like this, but the idea of actually having almost like a wave based mini game as such to remove Sentinels is really, really interesting. I really like the idea of it, especially since this would work so well with the idea of colonizing a planet, of making a planet your home. If you were to remove the Sentinels off it, it would make it that bit more like your own planet, as in you have the most influence, not these little robot squares that are flying around. And I think the idea of hacking a computer fits into the whole kind of lore of No Man's Sky as well, because terminals and deciphering these shitty codes is a big ass part of the game. So I think that would slot in really, really nicely. So thank you very much for this comment. I think it's a very, very unique idea. Thank you as always for taking the time to type it up. And finally, we have a comment which is probably the longest one on here, but says some really, really good stuff. And this comment is from an individual called New Mathematician. It's a very, very interesting name for sure. And this individual says the following. I think that you should be able to visit the different homeworlds of the different races. So maybe once you reach a certain standing with a particular race, a NPC will give you coordinates to his homeworld. Maybe these planets are actually designed out rather than procedurally generated and contain cities with large populations of NPCs. And to be honest with you, the idea of just finding a home planet, of finding the origin of a faction, would be something which I think would be needed in some kind of strange way. Considering the lore of No Man's Sky is quite extensive, and especially considering that factions are a pretty fat part of the game, to be honest with you, the idea of the reputation being enforced that bit more. So as this individual says, when you become friends with them, as you will, you can visit their home planet, and then that opens up a whole new section of gameplay. And what I like is that a lot of people always state about cities and NPCs and stuff like that, which are all great, but this comment puts it in context. It gives a reason to have a city if it's on my home planet. So I really like the idea. Thank you for taking the time to comment, and of course I hope you feel happy because I've given you a little peck on the cheek. and that was really fucking weird. We're gonna move on. So that is the end of the video, guys. I do hope you enjoyed. As always, if you want to get featured in the next episode of Community Feedback Friday, then either drop your ideas on this video, the previous episode, or any other No Man's Sky video, and stick around till next week to see if you have earned a place on the list. So if you enjoyed this video, then please do let me know by dropping a like on it. If you guys could also subscribe to MZK, then that'd be absolutely fantastic. And as always, I will see you guys on my next video. This is SkintBoot, signing out.